John Miller thought he knew his family better than anyone, but when his wife Laura and son Ethan began slipping into the shadows of secrecy, his world unraveled into a nightmare of betrayal and crime he never imagined could happen inside his own home. The story begins in a quiet Florida suburb where families appear happy and lives move at a steady rhythm. But beneath the surface, shadows often linger. For John Miller, a hardworking father of two, life seemed steady until small details began to gnaw at his attention. His wife, Laura, had grown distant, her once warm laughter now replaced with cold silence. His teenage son, Ethan, had become secretive, slipping out late at night without explanation and returning with an uneasy look that he tried to mask with casual smiles. John brushed off these changes at first, telling himself that all families go through phases. Yet the unease grew heavier each day, pressing on him with quiet force. The first real crack appeared one evening when John came home early from work. The house was too quiet, but the air carried a tension that seemed out of place. He noticed the family computer logged into an account he didn't recognize, filled with messages and bank transactions that had no clear purpose. Hidden among them were large withdrawals from their joint savings, money he had worked years to set aside. Confused and unsettled, John closed the files before anyone noticed he had been snooping. He told himself he must be mistaken, but the suspicion refused to fade. Over the next week, more details began to pile up like small pieces of a puzzle. Laura left the house at odd hours, claiming she was visiting friends. But her phone records told a different story. Ethan, once a quiet boy who loved video games, now carried himself with a strange confidence, flashing new clothes and a watch John knew he could never afford. It was not the behavior of a teenager earning a few dollars mowing lawns. John's instincts screamed that something darker was unfolding right under his roof. At night, he would sit alone in the living room, staring at the family photos on the wall. The smiling faces seemed almost mocking now, like a fragile mask hiding the cracks beneath. He began to notice how Laura avoided his eyes during dinner, how Ethan's hands shook ever so slightly when he was asked simple questions. Each detail pulled him deeper into suspicion, a gnawing sense that his family was harboring a dangerous secret. The calm life he thought he had built was slipping away, replaced by questions he was not yet ready to answer. Yet one thing was certain: John would not rest until he uncovered the truth, no matter how dark it turned out to be. John's suspicions deepened when he decided to follow his instincts instead of brushing them aside. One night, after pretending to head to bed early, he slipped quietly out of the house and waited in his car across the street. Hours later, Laura and Ethan left together, their voices hushed as they walked quickly to another vehicle parked a few houses down. The sight struck him as strange. Why would his wife and son sneak off together in the middle of the night without saying a word? He started the engine and trailed behind them, careful to keep his headlights dimmed. His hands trembled on the steering wheel, a mix of fear and adrenaline building with each passing block. They drove to the edge of town, stopping near an abandoned warehouse that looked forgotten by time. John watched as the two disappeared inside, leaving him to sit in the silence of his car with his heart pounding against his chest. When they emerged nearly an hour later, they carried bags that looked heavy and deliberate. Ethan glanced nervously around before getting back into the car, while Laura moved with a sharp confidence that unsettled John. He snapped a few blurry photos with his phone, knowing he needed proof of whatever they were involved in. The following day, John searched the house while they were out. In the back of Ethan's closet, he found envelopes stuffed with cash. Some of the bills were crumpled and stained, as if they had been hurriedly stuffed away. Hidden in Laura's drawer, he uncovered receipts for expensive electronics, none of which were in the house. The discovery churned his stomach, because the explanation was no longer innocent. His wife and son were tied to something criminal, and he had no idea how far it went. John tried to confront them indirectly by asking casual questions, but their answers were hollow and rushed. Ethan grew defensive, while Laura brushed him off with a dismissive tone. The distance between them widened with every exchange. What troubled John most was not only the betrayal, but the secrecy between mother and son. It was as if they shared a bond built on lies, one that excluded him entirely. The family he thought he knew was slipping further out of reach, and the fear of what they were hiding pushed him to dig deeper. The more he uncovered, the more he realized that this was no ordinary family problem. Something dangerous was moving closer to the surface, and soon it would tear everything apart. John's search for answers soon pushed him into darker territory. He began shadowing Laura and Ethan more often, timing his evenings so he could slip away without being noticed. Each night revealed another fragment of a truth that seemed larger and more sinister than he could have imagined. One evening, he followed them back to the same warehouse and, instead of waiting in the car, he edged closer, crouching behind broken fences and rusted machinery. From his hiding place, he could see faint light spilling from inside and hear the muffled sounds of voices. It wasn't just Laura and Ethan. There were other people there too, men whose faces he didn't recognize but whose presence radiated danger. Through a cracked window, John caught glimpses of what looked like stolen goods being exchanged. Electronics, boxes of jewelry, and even firearms passed from hand to hand. Laura's face was cold, determined, while Ethan lingered nearby, nervous but complicit. The sight left John frozen. His wife and son were entangled in organized crime, and worse, they weren't bystanders. They were active participants. He pulled back, nearly stumbling in the dirt, his stomach twisting with nausea. Back at home, the weight of what he had witnessed bore down on him. He wanted to storm into the house and demand answers, but fear held him back. Confrontation could put him in danger, and more importantly, it could drive them deeper into whatever criminal world they were involved in. Instead, he began documenting everything: photographs, notes, and even recordings from his phone. He became his own investigator, determined to collect enough evidence before deciding what to do next. The turning point came when he discovered a locked box hidden under the floorboards in the garage. After carefully prying it open, he found stacks of cash, identification cards that didn't belong to his family, and a handgun. The presence of the weapon made his blood run cold. This was no longer about stolen goods or secret money, it was about survival and violence. Each discovery chipped away at the life he thought he had built. The woman he married and the son he had raised were no longer recognizable. They were hiding behind masks, living double lives, and leaving him stranded in a reality he couldn't escape. The evidence painted a terrifying picture, and John knew that if he didn't act soon, the secret world they had built might collapse on all of them with devastating consequences. John's fear grew heavier with every new detail he uncovered, and soon the secrets inside his home became impossible to ignore. Days felt like an endless charade as he sat at the dinner table, pretending not to know that the people across from him were deeply entangled in something criminal. Laura's eyes seemed sharper, watching his every move, while Ethan grew more restless, his hands constantly tapping against the table, his gaze darting around as though he expected trouble at any moment. The tension in the house was suffocating, and John began to realize that he was not just a witness to their secrets, he was living inside a storm that could erupt at any time. One evening, he returned home earlier than usual and heard muffled voices behind the closed garage door. Quietly, he pressed his ear against it. The fragments of conversation he caught chilled him: discussions of a delivery, warnings about someone getting suspicious, and mentions of consequences if things went wrong. His name never came up, but John felt certain they were aware of his watchful eyes. For the first time, the danger felt personal. That night, he gathered all the evidence he had collected: photos, receipts, recordings, and spread them across the kitchen table. Looking at it all together, the scope of the truth became undeniable. His wife and son were tied to a smuggling ring operating out of Florida, and they had gone far beyond minor involvement. Laura appeared to be coordinating transactions, while Ethan acted as a runner, carrying packages and cash to keep the operation flowing. John's heart ached with betrayal, but fear quickly overshadowed it. If he went to the police without care, they could all become targets of the very criminals Laura and Ethan were dealing with. Unable to sleep, John wandered through the darkened house. Every creak of the floorboards sounded louder than usual, every shadow more threatening. He realized he was trapped in an impossible position: protect his family and risk becoming complicit in their crimes, or expose them and watch his world collapse. The walls of his home, once a place of comfort, now felt like a prison closing in. When Laura returned from another late-night trip, John noticed a faint smear of dirt on her clothes and a look in her eyes that was harder than ever before. Whatever line she had crossed, there was no turning back. John knew the final revelation was coming, and with it, a choice that would change all their lives forever. The breaking point arrived on a humid Florida night, when John followed Laura and Ethan once more, unable to silence the voice inside him that demanded the full truth. They drove farther than usual, down an isolated road lined with swampland, the air heavy with the buzz of insects. He parked at a distance and moved closer on foot, careful not to make a sound. From the cover of Tall Grass, he saw them unloading crates from the back of a truck and passing them to shadowy figures waiting nearby. Under the dim glow of headlights, John finally saw what the crates held: illegal weapons. The reality slammed into him like a physical blow. His wife and son were not just dabbling in crime. They were part of something that could destroy countless lives. For a moment, John stood frozen, his mind spiraling. Every memory of family dinners, birthdays, and quiet nights came crashing down under the weight of betrayal. He no longer recognized the people before him. Laura's hardened expression and Ethan's nervous obedience revealed the truth: mother and son had bound themselves to a criminal world that left no room for escape. When the deal ended and the vehicles drove off, John slipped away, his decision already forming. By the time he returned home, his hands shook as he gathered the evidence he had spent weeks collecting. He knew the risk of turning it over, but he also knew he could not remain silent. The line between love and justice had been erased, leaving him with no choice but to protect the world beyond his front door, even if it meant destroying his family. The next morning, John walked into a police station with a folder clutched tightly against his chest. Every step felt like betrayal, but also release. He handed over the files, the photos, and the recordings, his voice steady as he described what he had seen. Officers listened, their faces grim, and assured him that action would be taken. Within days, everything collapsed. Law enforcement raided the warehouse and the network crumbled. Laura and Ethan were arrested, their double lives exposed to the world. John stood at a distance as they were led away in handcuffs, his heart heavy with grief, yet oddly lighter without the crushing weight of secrets. The family he once cherished was gone, shattered beyond repair, but the truth had finally come to light. In the end, John learned that sometimes the greatest danger comes not from strangers, but from the people closest to you.